When you hear the term related services, it actually means those services which are related to your child's individualized education program needs. But for further explanation of related services, Jen, give us a little rundown on it.
Sure. Well, the IDEA, the federal law, defines related services in a very comprehensive way.
Yeah, almost too comprehensively. It's for us to go into right now.
There are some very common related services that parents should become familiar with, knowing that the list is pretty long.
Exhaustive.
And there are going to be some services that certain children need that others don't. But the most important ones to think about that most kids are going to need: transportation. It's the first thing listed, okay? And it's basically what all related services are about is those services that are necessary to enable the child to access their special education and to benefit from their special education program, right?
If I could stop you there,
sure.
Just talking about transportation, often I've had a conversation with parents where they'll say, well, if the school does that, do they have to get my child there? And there's that answer. If the school team has decided that this is the appropriate services, if these are the appropriate services that your child needs, they actually have to get your child there too, which is why transportation is the number one listed related service.
Right, and home too, getting them there and home.
Right.
I can't tell you how many times parents will call me and then I'll find out that the parent has been transporting by themselves. And some parents choose to do that, and that's fine, especially for very young children or for whatever reason it's your comfort level. But if you're doing it because at the end of the meeting they say, well, you're going to have to drive them if you want this program, that is not what the IDA says. Transportation is a related service, and for some children it requires special transportation. So it may mean additional support on a separate bus. It may mean support on the regular bus. It may mean making sure the child has an air-conditioned bus because of some condition of the disability. So transportation is something that has to be specified right in the individualized education program, and you have to discuss whether or not special transportation is required. But other related services that are very common that we see in many, many IEPs, speech and language services, occupational therapy services, physical therapy services, counseling. One thing that I always want to remind families of is that medical diagnosis, not medical treatment, but medical diagnosis is a related service under the IDA. That's important because there are some disabilities that can be ruled out or ruled in by one simple medical test. And if your insurance doesn't cover it, you don't have insurance, you're in a position where you have no idea whether or not your child has this disability, and you turn to your school district and say, well, we may be designing a very different program for this child if we know that it's this disorder versus this disorder, or that it's not that, then that medical diagnosis is in fact a related service under the IDEA. Not medical treatment. That is not within the special education laws, but medical diagnosis is.
Right. And so, as you said, Jen, the more common ones that most of you are probably familiar with: speech and language, occupational therapy, physical therapy, counseling services, psychological services, maybe the social worker. These are your typical related services.